Hi, my name is Kevin Ward. First and foremost, I am a child of God. I'm here on this earth to serve God and to live my life out as laid out in the Bible. I do that in multiple ways. One of those is as a deacon at the Park Church of Christ, where I oversee the sports ministry, and another is an employee of Stevens Media Group. Stevens Media Group is a nationwide company with groups of radio stations literally from coast to coast in the US, 77 radio stations total. 7 of those are in Tulsa, and one of those 7 is the Sports Animal Radio Network, where I serve as the program director. But I'm also in sales of all of the 7 properties. I've been doing a combination of being an on-air personality and salesperson for over 30 years in Oklahoma. And so there are some things that I want to share with you as we go along this morning. And one of those is the fact that we recently celebrated an anniversary here in the state of Oklahoma. And that anniversary was on April the 19th. And that was the 25th anniversary of the Murrah bombing. When the bomb went off at 9:03, and by the way, this is home video that I took on our VHS camcorder just a couple of months later after the bombing. When it went off at 9:03 a.m. on that Wednesday morning back in 1995, and again, that was home video that I took. I was working at KTOK Radio in Oklahoma City. Our offices were on the 50th floor of the Penn building, which is right across the street from Penn Square Mall. It's about 4 miles from where the Murrah building once stood. And when it went off, it shook our entire 16-story building. My office window faced south, and I could see the black smoke billowing from the blast site. KTOK is a news talk station, and our news team went to work right away as we had a reporter already in the downtown area, actually for another news story. Guthrie, where Suzanne and I lived at the time, was and is about 30 miles away from the blast site. And Suzanne and her co-workers at the local DHS felt their building shake a couple of minutes later. It was evident that it was a pretty big blast, and the event captivated the entire country for several weeks. In all, 168 people were killed, 700 others were injured. Given all the people that responded to the tragedy, as well as those involved, there are thousands of stories that have come out of that event. One of those stories is this woman, Amy Downs, who was working as a credit union person in the federal building. She was trapped under the rubble for more than 6 hours, crying out for help and hoping another bomb wasn't about to explode. I had all this regret for how I had been living my life, she told the TV show Today back in September of 2018. It was one of those things where I literally promised God that if I somehow made it out alive, that I would never live my life the same. And I've tried very hard to live up to that claim. Downs was 28 years old at the time and weighed 355 pounds. She has since lost 200 pounds, become a fixture at memorial events for the bombing, and done her best to keep her promise. Another is Ruth Schwab, who told this story to OETA in 2016. I usually got to work between 9:20 and 9:30 a.m. I actually got there at 2 minutes to 9 on April 19th. In fact, when I walked in, people were going, "Did my watch stop? It's not 9 o'clock yet. What are you doing here?" I flipped on my computer to warm it up, and that's when I heard this horrific noise. Your brain works in funny ways, and I thought my computer blew up. Then I started to feel like I was falling. It reminded me of a sci-fi movie where they have the black hole and the people are falling down and down and down, and you wonder if you're ever going to hit the ground. I guess when I hit the bottom of the black hole was when I actually passed out. And this is where our lesson begins. What is your story? In December of 2018, I started a podcast called Suit Up. The idea was to tell the story of Christians who also were in the sports world. Since I started it, I've had 12 incredible stories from some local, some national, and some with a combination of both. But all 12 have incredible stories of how God rescued them from situations of great despair. Some of those stories included, or do include, a person homeless and living in the school's press box, a healthy 19-year-old suddenly paralyzed from the neck down, a person who suffered through multiple miscarriages, and actually that would be a family, someone who grew up in an abusive home, someone who was alcoholic and unfaithful, another who felt not good enough, not pretty enough, or not smart enough. These are just a few of the 12. The homeless and living in the school's press box is actually a guy named Brennan Marion. Brennan still holds the NCAA FBS record for single season record for yards per catch with 31.9 yards per catch. And for a career, he had 2 years at the University of Tulsa and averaged 28.7 yards per catch in those 2 years. But when he was coming out of high school, he wanted to play college football, and the only place he could was at a junior college in California. And when he committed to come out to California and play, the head coach had promised him a scholarship, which would also give him a place to stay and food to eat and all those things. Well, he gets to California and finds out that his coach has left, and now he has nothing, but he wants to play college football. So he ends up going to a different junior college there in the Los Angeles area to play, but not with a scholarship. He's a walk-on. And so Brennan had to find a place to stay on people's couches, in the school's press box, in cars. He even stole to eat to make it. And what happened to Brennan was he became a junior college All-American. He then was given a scholarship to play football at the University of Tulsa, and where he became a record holder. Now Brennan, who once his playing days were over, which were very limited because of ACL injuries, got into coaching, started out on the high school level. And when I did my interview with him last year, Brennan was the offensive coordinator at William & Mary. He has recently taken a job as the offensive coordinator at the University of Hawaii. A healthy 19-year-old suddenly paralyzed from the neck down. This is a young man named Sterling Thomas. Sterling was a really good football player in the Tulsa area, played at Powerhouse Tulsa Union High School. He went to play college at Lindenwood University. It's a Division II school in the St. Louis area. And midway through his freshman season, he went to make a tackle, actually. His quarterback had thrown an interception in the first game that he got significant playing time in. And he went to make the tackle, and he got blocked from behind, which changed the trajectory of his head, where he had aimed to hit the player. And so he hit that other player, obviously in a bad way, and it broke his neck, and he's been paralyzed mostly from the chest down. He has some use of his arms since then. Sterling has gone on to start a foundation called Push, Push, Pray. And the object with his foundation is to help others who are in his situation to understand where they are and how they need to be able to change their thinking to make themselves productive and to have a productive life. And since the injury, actually, last year, because this happened a few years ago, he has gone back to Lindenwood and actually graduated from college. Suffered through multiple miscarriages. Well, a lot of us have done that. I know my wife and I, we suffered through one miscarriage early in our marriage. But this was Tress Way, who was an all-pro punter for the Washington Redskins. He and his wife tried multiple times to have a baby, and she suffered one miscarriage after another. And finally, on the fourth attempt, when they thought she was going to have another miscarriage, she actually was able to have those two children. But Tress tells the story of the pain that he and his wife went through after each one of those miscarriages, and just wondered what God's plan was for them. They held steadfast, though, in the faith, and as you can see the results with those two children. In fact, I think they've added a third now. Grew up in an abusive home. This is NFL Hall of Famer Steve Largent. Steve went to the University of Tulsa to play college football, but he grew up in Oklahoma City and had a stepfather who was very abusive to him and the rest of his family. And he persevered through all of that, and not only went to play college football, but obviously had a great career with the Seattle Seahawks. And by the time he left the NFL, he was the league's all-time leader in catches and yards and touchdowns. Alcoholic and unfaithful. This is Phil Robertson, best known from Duck Dynasty, the matriarch of the Robertson family. His interview on Suit Up is, boy, it's got it all. He'll make you laugh, he'll make you cry. But early in his life, he was a lot like Paul. In fact, I even told him when I interviewed him that I thought he was a modern day Paul. But he had a lot of alcoholism. He was unfaithful, and he persecuted Christians early in his life. But we know how he's turned that around. Feeling not good enough, pretty enough, or smart enough. This was a very interesting story. I knew Kelly Masters many, many years ago, before she was ever a NFL agent. And as you can tell, you can see the Miss Oklahoma picture there. She was Miss Oklahoma, and she finished in the top 10 in Miss America. And you have to wonder about a woman like Kelly, who doesn't think that they're pretty enough. She has a law degree or smart enough. And she held true to a lot of values growing up, but she just felt incomplete. And until she could get everything in her mind right with God, she had all of these feelings that were just pinned up inside, until she was able to break down one night in prayer to God and felt like she had the answer she was looking for to be able to move on and be able to enjoy life. And now she's one of the most successful female sports agents in the country. So what biblical examples do we have of overcomers? Do we have any? Any redemption stories in the Bible? Absolutely. There are dozens and dozens. David would be one. How about Abraham, Joseph, Moses, Samson, Paul, Adam and Eve? I mean, the list doesn't stop there. I mean, there's Noah, Joshua, Aaron, Elijah, Elisha, Jacob, Solomon. It just, again, it goes on. And of course, there's Jesus, the greatest communicator the world has ever seen or ever will see. Parables are the heart and soul of Jesus' teachings. A simple story used to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson. The mustard seed, the sower, lost sheep, prodigal son, two debtors, hidden treasure, lost coin, unjust steward. Those are just a few of the many parables that Jesus used to teach with. In Mark chapter 4, starting in verse 10, and you can read that on the screen, Jesus was addressing the 12 disciples and others who were close to him. He reminded them that they had been given insight into God's kingdom, that they knew how it worked. But to those that can't see it yet, everything comes in stories. Their eyes are open but can't see a thing. Ears are open but don't understand a word. Who avoid making an about face and ultimately getting forgiven. He went on in verse 13, asking them if they know how this story works, that all his stories work this way. And then he tells the parable of the seeds. Stories sell products and services. As I mentioned, I've also worked in radio ad sales for over 30 years. One thing that I found out a long time ago is the best way to get a listener interested in buying a product or service from a business is to tell a story. In an article written by Natasha Che in 2017 for entrepreneur.com, she writes, whatever line of business you're in, almost everyone nowadays is in the business of selling. Whether you're trying to get customers to buy your product, pitch your company to investors, motivate your employees, or get your teenager to do the dishes, your success will be dictated by your ability to influence and persuade. And storytelling is arguably the most powerful tool in your toolbox. Here in Tulsa, and a lot of you that are watching this now, you have seen Mike Rampy. Mike and his wife, Narissa, started the company Air Assurance Heat and Air, and now they also do plumbing decades ago. In his most recent TV ads, Mike tells stories of his mischievous youth where he got life lessons from his father. And now he has taken those lessons into his business. These are real stories. And a lot of us did very similar things growing up, and we can relate. And people like the fact that he's taken these negative things that happened and turned them into positives. I always encourage a business owner to be a part of their commercials and to tell their story. It makes such an impact. Some of you may have noticed this picture that's behind me on the wall. I bought that picture. I work at Cityplex Towers in Tulsa, and it's a 60-story tower, huge lobby down low. And one day in 2008, I went into the building and somebody was having an art show, and that picture was there. And so I bought it. And it's a nice picture, from a different angle, with Jesus on the cross. And if the story just ended there, you would think, well, that's really not much of a story, right? That's a nice picture. Okay. Well, as Paul Harvey would say, or would have said many years ago, here's the rest of that story. Back in 2008, my wife, Suzanne, was having difficulty swallowing. Something happened and she was choking a lot it didn't matter whether it was a little bit of food or a little bit of drink. Something was going on in her throat that was causing her to choke, to send food down her windpipe. And so she went to the doctor, and the doctor felt around. He felt a little lump in there and said, well, we're going to have to schedule an ultrasound and get in there and see what's going on. But, most of the time, this is what that is. And it could very well be a tumor that has attached itself to your carotid artery. And so the surgery for that is very difficult because it involves your carotid artery and it could cause death. I mean, it was a real serious thing. We even asked a few of our doctor friends at church about it, and they felt around and said, that's what it feels like to me too. That's probably what it is. And so we prayed so hard before that ultrasound that Jesus would just remove that tumor and that nothing would be there. 2008 was 12 years ago. So our youngest, who's now 25, was only 13 at the time. And then we had a 15-year-old, and then we had our stepdaughter who was also with a couple of young kids. So we had grandkids at the time, and obviously it would have been devastating for all those children, let alone me, to lose their mom. So we just prayed very hard about it. So we go and get the ultrasound done, and I'm there with her. It's in the morning, and I noticed that the nurse just keeps going over the area. And I know they're not supposed to say anything to you about what they see or don't see. But obviously, this was a real important thing for us. And so basically, I just begged her. I said, you keep moving that thing around. Is there a reason why? You know, how big is that tumor? And she said, I keep moving it around because I don't see anything. There is no tumor there. It turned out that Suzanne had a kink in her carotid artery, and that's what was causing the issues for her in her swallowing. Well, we just didn't look at that as, oh, well, that was convenient, that it was something different. We gave God all the glory. We cried that day. Thank God for removing that tumor from her neck. So when I left that appointment and I went to my work, and I went in through the building, and there was this art show, and what was the first picture that I saw? It was that one. If you turn that picture around on the back, it says November 5th, 2008. I wrote the date on the back of that picture because I always wanted to remember that date, but I didn't even really have to write it down because I remember it to this day. And now when you come over to our house, or those who have been to our house, the next time you come and you see that picture, it's not going to have the same weight. It has a story behind it. And it involves our Lord and our Savior, not just the depiction in that picture, but what that picture stands for. You know, some of you may be like me, and you grew up in a Christian home, became a Christian at an early age, and don't really have any dramatic stories to tell. I challenge you, though, to think differently. As your love for God grows and your relationship grows, tell that story. How God has moved you to think differently, to act differently, putting others' needs before your own. As I mentioned at the beginning of this class, my identity isn't wrapped up in my job or in a title at church. My identity is child of God. I'm here to help grow his kingdom, and my story and others' stories will help do that. And I challenge you to do the same.